All right, welcome back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Men Against the State. Welcome back to Voluntaryist Academy. This is going to be the grand finale of the Men Against the State series. And I can't wait to finish this up. It's been a hell of a ride. Okay. So a little catch up earlier today on the channel. We did a reading from the Anti-Federalist Papers, and it'll be something I do every now and then to take a reading out of this and give it to you guys. After tonight is done with the Men Against the State series. So this is the book that we've been going through, and we're going to finish tonight. We're going to do The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. We're going to do that. And I talked to Jeffrey Hahn. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Today, I talked to Jeffrey today for a moment, and we're going to start off the new year with a series based on his book called The Fallacious Belief in Government, Warp Speed Toward Tyranny. And this is a very clear and concise and coherent 3 C's. The messaging in this book is very clear, and it's very comprehensive. So I can't wait to dive into this and give it the honor that it deserves. Jeffrey spoke at PorkFest a couple of years ago, and his speech at PorkFest is on YouTube. And yeah, so that's it. Become a member, support the show, $3 a month. For the first 30 people. I don't know how many spots are left. Probably a couple dozen. And then if you want, you can support in other ways too. Do all that at voluntaryistacademy.com. And yeah, so without any further ado, we have the final edition here. And if you can't tell, yes, it's true. I'm a little burnt out on this, but I set out to do it. So we're going to finish it. Last week we covered Benjamin Tucker. This week we'll continue covering Tucker, and we'll finish out with Tucker in the Age of Liberty, Part 2, Section 6. Liberty as a journal and mirror of contemporary history. Despite the fact that liberty became the medium through which some 60 persons expressed their views in a formal manner through its long existence, the editorial policy never escaped Tucker's control. This he had intended from the first issue, and occasionally he saw fit to remind associates to whom a free hand in writing what they pleased offered a temptation to influence the paper's policies. At the height of the 1887 controversy, Tucker declared to his contributors and subscribers alike, quote, "Liberty has always represented its editor and must continue to do so." It is in this sense that the paper is extremely interesting, as a reflection of Tucker's personality and thus as the spotlight of a native small n, radical group upon the history of the nation in his own time. The wide range of his interests and the intensity of his personal likes and antipathies was displayed in a running editorial commentary in his paper, undoubtedly fully endorsed by the great majority of his readers. The issues, persons, and events can be logically arranged only with great difficulty. In the customary editorial columns and in a department of briefs headed quote, on picket duty, end quote, the discussion of current affairs from the Tuckerian and anarchist point of view primarily took place, while an occasional pithy contribution to criticism merited separate printing as a pamphlet. Tucker rarely discussed prominent political figures, although he now and then showed interest in a particular national election. In the 1884 campaign, he went as far as to favor Samuel J. Tilden, whom he believed to be an honest man and 2/3 an anarchist, while at the same time reminding anarchists that theirs was the non-voting course. The results of the off-year elections of 1890, however, brought unconcealed expression of pleasure. Quote, the defeat of Cannon, McKinley, and other Republican ringleaders, and the sudden extinction of Reed, Ingalls, Quay, and the rest of the bulldozing tyrants and brazen corruptionists can only gladden and cheer the heart of every real lover of liberty and manhood. End quote, he trumpeted. The unconcern did not extend to issues, on the other hand, in which a lively interest was shown. The move to exclude Chinese immigration was set aside as a quote-unquote short-sighted demand, aided by monopolists to hide from workers the real reason why for their want and increasing insecurity. The usual championing of unpopular causes extended to a defense of the Mormons and their right to establish any social institutions they chose, interference with which was termed an outrageous invasion of human rights. Tucker brought down upon himself the wrath of GAR by supporting the belief that Memorial Day was an annual show, prepared as a piece of political expediency by, quote, the political Barnums of the Republican Party, end quote, in hopes of exploiting the sensibilities of those who had lost friends and relatives in the war, obtaining their praise and thanks in the process. Internal affairs touching economic matters were favorite topics upon which to dwell. Tucker firmly believed that private competitive businesses could furnish better postal service at less cost than the federal government, and criticism of the post office department was a frequent entry. He refused to line up with the Greenback movement because of the insistence upon the right of exclusive issue of money by the central government by their leaders. For a time in 1892, he entertained the hope that the acts imposing taxes upon the issue of state or private banknotes might be repealed when bills providing for this were introduced by Southern senators. Strangely enough, Tucker solidly endorsed the income tax provision included in the Wilson-Gorman Tariff Act, declaring in the summer of 1894 that it had, quote, evidently come to stay in American government economy, end quote, a, quote, propaganda of discontent by deed of legislators forced to yield to popular feeling. Interpreted Tucker the following: under present conditions of monopoly and plutocracy tempered by spoliation, the favor of the income tax with politicians is a sign of progress. We are at least sure of getting rid of the sickening cant of the Denas and spread eagle orators about the absence of classes and the cheerful payment of taxes in this country. An income tax is a recognition of the fact that industrial freedom and equality of opportunity no longer exist here, even in the imperfect state in which they once did exist. On the other hand, he kept up a characteristic irreverence toward Theodore Roosevelt and the trust-busting campaign. It was Tucker's stand that Roosevelt was hopelessly inconsistent in maintaining that the tariff and trust problems were distinct and should remain apart. Protection by tariff walls sheltered and bolstered the very combines he sought to disintegrate. Therefore, Tucker believed that regardless of the amount of government regulation and supervision, it, quote, would not affect them in the least, end quote. The early 1890s, saw a noticeable increase in the volume of current political and social questions argued in Liberty, and an accompanying decline in controversies of a theoretical nature. Tucker showed his characteristic sympathy for laborers involved in industrial disputes while maintaining his skepticism toward unionization. He backed every prominent strike which came to his attention, including the Pacific Mills strike of April 1882 in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and that of the telegraph operators in the summer of 1883. The miners and railroad men involved in the Cripple Creek strike in the early summer of 1894, and the much better known Homestead and Pullman strikes. Although not an admirer of the populists, he thought them worthy of support, declaring that their struggle against plutocracy was commendable. He singled out for particular mention their stand in defense of Coxey's Commonwealth Army. Tucker considered that the daily press was collective guilty of, quote, pure and malicious falsehood, in describing this group as a body of professional tramps. Although frowning on Coxey's public works plan, Tucker considered him a man of brains, character, and great determination. There was no doubt as to where the sympathies of Tucker and Yaros lay during the Pullman strike in particular. For one thing, they believed that the idea of employees as individuals making contracts with monopolies was now completely discredited and shown to be a thinly disguised procedure of legal injustice. Tucker refused to place any stock in the stories of violence and aggression attributed to the strikers, and at best believed that what incidents of this type had occurred had been instigated by the company. Said Tucker the following: "To those who shriek that labor is criminal, we say that capital is far more criminal. Monopoly's tears excite no sympathy. Monopoly cannot expect to retain a monopoly of the weapon of force forever. Labor is slow, but it is gradually learning the tricks of monopoly and will master the whole science before long." Tucker approved of Altgeld's stand and thought his treatment by the newspapers, quote, shameful and stupid. He castigated the Senate for its enthusiastic support of Cleveland's interference decision, yet through all his championing of the strikers, did not abuse Pullman, whom he looked upon simply as one of the many monopolists who had become rich because of state protection. Okay, so real quick, real brief aside, and we'll get right back to it. So let's look at that quote. Let's look at that section again. Tucker looked upon many monopolists as only having become rich because of state protection. So we can kind of suss out a little bit of a narrowing down of criticism here. And in doing so, we can find who the real culprit is. So it's not necessarily a free market. It's not necessarily a free market capitalism that's at fault. It's state capitalism. It's state monopoly, right? State regulations protecting monopolies. And why are they doing that? Probably even back then and these days, not a history major, but I'm pretty sure even back in these days, people like Andrew Carnegie were around. The Astors, Rockefeller was around, I'm pretty sure. A lot of these people were around at the turn of the century, the 20th century, and they would lobby with the government, and they would get the state to protect them. So back to the reading. On learning of the arrest of Eugene V. Debs on conspiracy charges, Tucker wrote, No court in this country has ever rendered a more iniquitous decision, or one more far-reaching in its evil possibilities than that of Judge Woods of the United States Circuit Court in the Debs case, flatly declaring that the principle that restraint of trade accomplished by conspiracy was unlawful, was false, another device utilized to make striking workmen innocuous. Tucker said, one by one, the authorities are stripping the laborers of all their peaceful and non-invasive weapons, determined to leave them only the ballot and the bomb, both of which are weapons of invasion and neither of which can help them in the slightest. Very true. Very true. What was going on back then? This is, again, why they were turning to the workers owning the means of production. The 19th century was a complicated time. The Industrial Revolution, the abolition of the supposed abolition of chattel slavery in America, the ending of the slave trade, all of that stuff going on. I wouldn't say exactly simultaneously, but in very close contact with one another. And these men were worried about getting kind of brought into, again, they were worried about getting brought into the factories and be made into slaves. So that's why they were fighting for what they were fighting for. I'm not a socialist, but I can understand in this time the need for the counterculture, the need for the pushback. This is a part of how natural law operates. There's always going to be resistance. There should always be resistance. However, in most cases through history, that resistance has been misguided or misled, or I mean misled in the way of having bad leadership. But or not going all the way and taking concessions. But I mean, this is part of the whole thing about Voluntaryist Academy here, is that even if the state exists, you need people like me. You need people that are voluntarists. You need people that are anarchists out there pointing out these things and not being afraid. Not being afraid of the government and not being afraid to call them out. This is a natural course of human history. So Deb's later conviction and imprisonment he used as an object lesson of the use being made of the state by its benefactors. The spectacle of Debs in jail will be an eye-opener to thousands, he remarked, predicting even greater invasion of working men by corporations through manipulation of the courts. See? A lot of predictions there. Greater invasions of working men by corporations through manipulation of the courts. Tucker's dislikes are best appreciated by noting their universality. The development of antipathy towards such diversified personalities as the sociologist Albion W. Small, William Randolph Hearst, the historian Herman von Holst, E. L. Godkin of The Nation, the National Association of Manufacturers, A. Lawrence Lowell, and the economist historian Richard T. Ely, along with those already discussed, points to a well-rounded acquaintance with contemporaries, even if the relationship was primarily negative and critical. The worldwide intellectual struggle of the anarchist against the state has occasionally been complicated by recourse to violence and assassination, the motives of which have been obscure. In some cases, idealism has been the underlying incentive, especially in political killings, where the belief that a tyrant is being eliminated dominates the assassin. Whatever may have been the attending circumstances, anarchism and violence have become popularly understood as interchangeable as a result of a spectacular series of such actions between 1880 and 1905 in particular. The anarchist argument that mere brushes between the armed forces of two states often cause more loss of life than the total of all anarchist-inspired slayings has not obtained any noticeable attention, and by and large, the concern of non-revolutionary anarchists has generally been to disavow their relation with those implicated in the killing of politically prominent persons. It is with this approach that Liberty and Tucker afford an interesting study when related to the outstanding assassinations and demonstrations of violence of American origin during the period mentioned above. Well, here at Voluntaryist Academy, we're just trying to get educated. Okay? I'm not advocating for any violence here. We're here to change hearts and minds. The assassinations are terrible, and they do, at this point in time, and probably in all points of time, they've never helped. We can see through history. That nothing's ever really, the assassinations haven't really helped. So if we're going to learn anything from that, we have to understand that we're at a point where the order followers are going to follow orders, and they're going to be there. So we have to take a more lenient approach. We have to take a more intellectual approach to this, a scholarly approach to this, changing hearts and minds and doing peaceful things, counterculture, and have the revolution be of the heart and mind. I just wanted to say that because it's true. Like this is the point in part of history where anarchism was gaining some ground as an intellectual movement, and it's being kneecapped by political assassinations. And we have a long way to go in the deep dive and discovery process of these assassinations and what exactly happened during them. And were these people perhaps, were they early false flags, or whatever the term is? Were these political assassinations legitimate? Is yet to be seen on this channel. So if anyone has any information leading to more discovery of some of these political assassinations, like the one of William McKinley, who was assassinated by somebody who claims to have been an anarchist. I forget his name, but this led to the formation. McKinley's assassination led to the formation of Interpol. I think McKinley was stabbed multiple times, died a couple weeks later, and in that time, world leaders got together and decided to create Interpol because America wasn't the only place going through this anarchist thing. We've covered in previous installations of this series that there was an international anarchist movement, and places in Europe, namely France, even Italy, a couple of other, even in England, like there was anarchist movements going on. So, but back to the reading. Tucker, it will be remembered, had been an apologist for the nihilist program in Russia in the first few years of his editorship, during which time he shared and reflected the idealism which permeated the young revolutionaries in that country and elsewhere in Europe. During this same period, the shooting of President Garfield occurred, at which time the objective stand toward sensational demonstrations of this type first began to be formulated. An example of his realism when confronted with a concrete situation at home, similar to those which were drawing his approval in Russia. For the Guaito, that's right, the Guaito style of assassination, we have no apology, explained Tucker, at the same time expressing wonder at the change in the popular attitude toward a man whom the majority just a short time before were labeling a, quote, bribed man and perjurer. It was this that convinced him that the man was not receiving sympathy, but the abstraction of the office Garfield held was what the mourners were revering by their concern. Tucker thought Guaito insane, as did Spooner, but Tucker was more concerned with displaying Guaito as a product of statism. He ridiculed the stand of the clergy on the case, declaring that Guaito's assertion to being the Lord's partner in the killing of the president rested on grounds every bit as good as John Calvin's or Moses. His execution was deplored as thoroughly as was the previous act of violence. The approach to Haymarket, as we have seen, was very similar to this in that both the violence and the police action were condemned, even though the sympathy of Tucker and his group was unmistakably for the arrested man, whom he always regarded as innocent. Tucker saw Spooner's trial by jury vindicated by the Chicago anarchist trial. In that choice by lot from the city's entire population should have guaranteed the presence of working men on the jury, a matter which he thought the prosecution carefully avoided by sifting from a selected panel. He called the judicial opinion at the time of condemnation, quote, a mixture of lies, misrepresentations, and idiocy, end quote, and remained convinced that Spies, Parsons, and Fisher were tried and convicted for their opinions. Liberty contained an impressive tribute to their memory, the issue following the execution, and Tucker sponsored anniversary memorials in Boston, at which time resolutions condemning the police and legal action in the case were proposed. The pardoning of Fielden, Schwab, and Neebe by John P. Altgeld in June 1893, Tucker hailed as, quote, the bravest act standing to the credit of a politician since Horace Greeley bailed Jefferson Davis. He also said, he has done nobly and shall be our gratitude, and his shall be our gratitude. Altgeld's decision required all the courage Tucker credited him with. For the reason of violence was still at hand, the shooting of Henry C. Frick by Alexander Berkman having taken place at the height of the Homestead labor struggle less than a year before. Here again, Tucker took the central position with a variant. The grief and indignation attending Frick's injury, Tucker said he could not share. He said, Henry C. Frick is a conspicuous member of the Brotherhood of Thieves, yet I am very sorry that he has been shot. He thought Berkman, at the time a complete stranger, one with whom he had much more in common than Frick, although in reality a greater menace. He said about, he says about Berkman, the worst enemy of the world is folly, and men like Berkman are its incarnation. It would be comparatively easy to dispose of Fricks if it were not for the Berkmans. The latter are the hope of the former. The strength of the Fricks rests on violence. Now it is to violence that the Berkmans appeal. The peril of the Fricks lies in the spreading of the light. Violence is the power of darkness. If the revolution comes by violence and in advance of light, the old struggle will have to be begun anew. The hope of humanity lies in the avoidance of that revolution by force, which the Berkmans are trying to precipitate. No pity for Frick, no praise for Berkman. Such is the attitude of liberty in the present crisis. From this time on, Tucker had many opportunities to defend anarchism from its definition as a cult of crime. One of the better of his treatises of this type is what's called Are Anarchists Thugs?, which contained, among other things, a breakdown of the subscription lists of liberty according to occupation or profession. This proved to be quite flattering as an indication of the quality of the individualist anarchist persuasion, justifying the Tuckerite contention that anarchism was first of all a variety of political belief. Tucker sailed for Europe on one of his periodic visits in August of 1901, and liberty was suspended for over a year thereafter. Hence, commentaries on the McKinley assassination do not exist. The fight to distinguish the individualist program from that of the propaganda by action group and spectacular isolation participants in violence has conducted in his absence by Henry Boole, Bool, a 30-year resident of Ithaca, New York, and recent adherent, but his attempt to justify the innocence of the Tuckerites was hopeless. By this time, the stigma anarchism has borne to the present day had been firmly impressed in Europe as well as in America. Liberty. I'll just take a break and thank RipMe6616 for being active in the chat on this live stream tonight. I stream live every Saturday night at right around 9 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. Hop in the chat, say hello, drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel. Do all that. Really helps me out. Makes me feel good about myself. Thanks a lot. Love you guys. Let's go. Liberty in Tucker's hands profited from his experience as a journalist and continued to do so during his more than 20 years of employment in Boston and New York publications. His own paper was not a money-making proposition. Most of the contributors had other jobs, and material was submitted free. Tucker announced to his readers in 1888, quote, "Neither the publisher of Liberty nor any of his co-workers get any reward for their labor beyond the pleasure of its performance," end quote. Within a year after the appearance of its first issue, the anarchist broadsheet had the reputation of being probably the most radical and revolutionary paper in the country. By its fifth year, it was internationally read, with a circulation covering all of Western Europe and points as distant as Australia. Circulation figures are obscure. In July 1886, Tucker declared that it was being mailed to at least 1,000 favorite subscribers. It is probable that it gradually declined during the 1890s, and there is little doubt of its unusual vitality from 1886 through 1889. During this period, it reached its peak as an organ of native anarchist expression, while the radical press as a whole was undergoing native small n anarchist expression, while the radical press as a whole was undergoing a serious decline in numbers and activity. This was the time when such representative statements of American anarchist theory and philosophy as Yaros's Why I Am an Egoist and Anarchism. Yaros's Why I Am an Egoist. He also wrote something else called Anarchism, Its Aims and Methods, as well as Tucker's State Socialism and Anarchism, as well as Tucker's Why I Am an Anarchist. These were all published in around that time. In 1887. I'm having trouble keeping up with the dates and the footnotes. If you want to get the footnotes, you can download this document at voluntaristacademy.com. On the resources page, it's there. Feel free to do that. Or you can just go to Internet Archive or the Mises Institute. The long theoretical contest with the state brought liberty into surprisingly few actual controversies with its tangible arms. Tucker sold as well as wrote and published radical and liberal materials, one item which constituted an objectionable work in Boston being Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The suppression of this in Boston in the spring of 1882, Tucker called a shameful satire upon our laws, especially the pressure upon his publisher to refuse further copies until desired deletions had been made. Anti-censorship. Tucker responded by publishing an unexpurgated edition and began publicly selling it in Boston in a type of test case action, defying the district attorney's office. Quote, the authorities must now bring the question to an issue or confess their defeat, end quote. He pointed out and later that summer remarked with pleasure that nothing had been done about it. The campaign lost much of its vigor, mainly through this stand. Whitman expressed his appreciation later when he wrote, quote, Tucker did brave things for Leaves of Grass when brave things were rare. I couldn't forget that, end quote. Another notable instance was the banning from the mails in the summer of 1890 of a translation of the Kreutzer Sonata by Leo Tolstoy on orders from Postmaster General John Wanamaker, Diawanawanga. This ruling met only passive resistance, as Tucker remarked that he enjoyed, quote, a partial liberty of speech, end quote, and wished to retain it, as it was his, quote, only weapon of warfare against existing evils, end quote. Oh, too right. Liberty assumed importance as a medium for the acquaintance of a portion of the radical group with a literary bent with translations of libertarian works of Russian, French, and German origin. This included, I've probably heard this name said before, but what is it? Chernyshevsky's? What's to be Done? Felix Piet's Rag Picker of Paris, excerpts from the work of Mackay, who was the author of Sturm and the Anarchisten, as well as a biography of Max Stirner and others. Tucker announced an ambitious plan to publish the entire works of Proudhon in English, but it was only partially realized. Translation led to further contact with overseas correspondents, who furnished interesting commentaries to the paper from several countries. Among these were George Bernard Shaw, Sophie Rafalovich from Paris, Octave Berger from Belgium, Mackay from Germany, D.A. Andrade from Australia, Wordsworth Donisthorpe from England, and a brilliant series of communications on the Italian scene written expressly for Tucker from Florence by the famed political economist Vilfredo Pareto. An attempt on the part of Tucker to supply a literary journal entirely devoted to translations of European literature, he called the Transatlantic, was abandoned after the publication of 16 issues between October of 1889 and June of 1890. What up, Theodore Lux? I see you there, bud. Thanks for being here. Rip Me 6616 says, the ego attaches to the mind faculties it does not possess. No anarchist is free of this fact. Upon assuming the editorship of the engineering magazine in New York in 1892, Tucker moved Liberty there from Boston. Henceforth, the paper experienced varying and steadily declining fortunes. It slipped from weekly to fortnightly and then to monthly issue between this time and 1897, when Tucker announced that thereafter it would have an irregular publication date. This continued until 1905, when regular bi-monthly publication went into effect for the remainder of its existence. An attempt to publish a German edition earlier under the direction of Schum also proved abortive. and Robert Reitzel's Der arme Teufel, the German language paper published in Detroit, continued to be practically the only organ of the non-English speaking radicals in which any of Tucker's philosophy might be read. So this is Tucker in the Age of Liberty, Part 2, Section 7. And this is it. This is the last section of the book, and we'll be done. And it's called The Decline of Individualist Anarchism as a Conscious Movement. I'd like to remind everybody that this book was written in 1952. This was published in 1952. So if we were to rewrite this, or we could make a Men Against the State Volume 2 and probably include people like Murray Rothbard, Mark Passio, Larkin Rose, among many others. Myself, maybe. Is that too much? But this is why it cuts off at Tucker. Tucker's prestige as an authority and spokesman in American anarchist circles advanced as the physical importance of his paper declined. His lectures on the philosophy of the individualist group brought him a large measure of public attention from time to time. One of his better-known public debates with the Christian socialist W.D.P. Bliss and President E. Benjamin Andrews of Brown University arguing for governmental regulation occurred at a Unitarian Ministers Institution gathering in Salem, Mass., October 14th, 1890, where his address, called The Relation of the State to the Individual, summarized the stand of the anti-statist persuasion of native origin. In 1893, at the insistence of associates, a compilation of his articles during a 12-year period was published in a volume titled Instead of a Book. So that was the volume. It was called Instead of a Book. Although intended as a propaganda document in the cause, this has since been used in good faith by outsiders interested in obtaining an objective understanding of the movement, unaware that significant material was omitted from its contents. Tucker characterized himself in later years as, quote, an extreme representative of one of the two great sociological tendencies that today divide the world. And it was in this capacity that he increasingly achieved prominence. The high water mark of his repute was his appearance as the spokesman for anarchism at the Conference on Trusts held by the Chicago Civic Federation late in the summer of 1899. On September 14th, he delivered his famous The Attitude of Anarchism Toward Industrial Combinations, which was an address which John R. Commons described as, quote, the most brilliant piece of pure logic, end quote. Heard during the duration of the several days assembly of nationally prominent speakers. In an environment in which his fellow speakers shared the conviction that the remedy for the trust problem lay in the extension of governmental restriction and supervision, Tucker presented in concise form his, quote, four monopolies argument, which had been in the process of definition since its presentation in the first issue of his paper over 18 years before. Hey, Rip, what's with the timestamp? Basically, the argument presented centered around the assertion that the trusts of their time were not the result of competition, but due to the denial of competition through other than economic means. Tucker declared that trusts were creatures of the state, and that the vast accumulations of wealth which they represented were due to, quote, the only means by which large fortunes can be rolled up, which are interest, rent, and monopolistic profit, end quote. Monopolies were created by the state through patent, copyright, and tariff legislation, through the system of land grants and centralization of finance in the hands of a few. Said Tucker, the following. Of these four monopolies, the banking monopoly, the land monopoly, the tariff monopoly, and the patent and copyright monopoly, the injustice of all, but the last named, is manifest even to a child. And proceeded, so that's the end of what Tucker said there, and proceeded to spend over a third of his allotted time in demonstrating that the justification of property in ideas grew out of the justification of property in concrete things, a far different matter. We have made property a fetish, he declared, and the fact that two people were unable to physically occupy the same material object was carried over to ideas. Perpetual property in ideas, then, which is the logical outcome of any theory of property in abstract things, would, had it been in force in the lifetime of James Watt, have made his direct heirs the owners of at least 9/10 of the now existing wealth of the world. While the consequences of its enforcement since the time of the invention of the Roman alphabet were equally fantastic. He concluded by re-emphasizing his belief that the money monopoly was the most serious and that, quote, perfect freedom in finance would wipe out nearly all trusts, end quote. Refusing to support any program of interference or antitrust legislation, he persisted in the description of them as, quote, systems of social disease originally caused and persistently aggravated by a regimen of tyranny and quackery, end quote. And adhering to the anarchist remedy, he said, free access to the world of matter, abolishing land monopoly, free access to the world of mind, abolishing idea monopoly, free access to an untaxed and unprivileged market, abolishing tariff monopoly and money monopoly. Secure these, and all the rest shall be added on unto you. For liberty is the remedy of every social evil, and to anarchy the world must look, at least for any enduring guarantee of social order. Despite the abstraction of his argument, which Commons and other, I want to talk about that real quick because we have to remember, we got to remember everybody. And when he's talking about abolishing tariff monopoly and money monopoly, there was no Federal Reserve when he was saying these things. There wasn't any of that. There wasn't an income tax. This is pre-Jekyll Island. This is just before. McKinley was famous for his tariffs. This is an important period of history because 1905, the financial panic of 1907 is what gets people all worked up. And then the Nelson Aldrich plan gets rejected because everyone thinks Aldrich is a creep. They don't like him. And then it just gets renamed and reworked a little bit and brought back. And that's now the federal, I forget what they renamed it, but it was what became the Federal Reserve. And, the central bank comes in. There wasn't a central bank in the country at the time. So, yeah. But there were taxes. It just wasn't the same as what we have now. So anyways, despite the abstraction of his argument, which Commons and others believed disqualified it as an expedient solution to the trust problem, the immediate reason for the conference, the daily press of both Chicago and New York commented in a favorable manner upon his address. The destruction by fire in April of 1908 of Tucker's bookshop and publication offices did more than bring to an end the appearance of liberty. It destroyed the central office of expression of the whole individualist anarchist group and brought about the departure of Tucker himself to France that same year, where he remained until his death in Monaco in 1939. Wow. that the cohesion of intellect, which had characterized the group in the 70s and the 80s, that's the 1870s and 1880s, had badly deteriorated long before the fire was apparent from the irregular appearance of their most famous journal. This had been augmented by defections to socialism in other portions of the radical front, as well as by the internal disputes over Stirner, Spencer, and the collectivist wing of anti-statism. Being uninsured, the property was a total loss, and Tucker took advantage of family financial aid to go to Europe, where he had serious intentions of reviving his publication of anarchist literature. As the possibility of meeting the heavy expense involved grew fainter, Tucker gradually lost enthusiasm, and in a postscript to a 1911 London edition of his State, Socialism, and Anarchism, he admitted that the anarchist solution for monopoly and the centralization of economic power in the hands of a minority was no longer applicable. Explaining his stand, he pointed out that when he wrote this quote-unquote essay 25 years before, he said, "The denial of competition had not yet affected the enormous concentration of wealth that now so gravely threatens social order, and that a policy of reversal of monopoly practices might have stopped the process of accumulation." Looking at the conditions of 1911, however, he found the way not so clear, since the tremendous capitalization now effected made monopoly a convenience, but no longer a necessity. Admitted Tucker, quote, "The trust is now a monster which, even the freest competition, could it be instituted, would be unable to destroy," end quote. Since upon the removal of all existing restrictions on competition, quote unquote, concentrated capital could set aside a sacrifice fund to remove any new competitors and continue the process of expansion of reserves. They have grown to such power that they can snuff out any competition. It was his firm conviction still that monopolies could be eliminated in a permanent manner only by the economic solutions proposed by anarchism, even though they had, quote, passed for the moment beyond their reach, end quote. Therefore, he concluded that the problem of the trusts, quote, must be grappled with for a time solely by forces political or revolutionary, end quote, which he thought would take the course of forcible confiscation, either through the machinery of government, quote, or in defiance of it, end quote, until the quote unquote great leveling did occur. However, the anarchist solution of free competition, free access to land and raw materials, free banking and free trade, and the exchange of equivalents instead of profit making, all these he thought might be preserved by teaching to the coming generation. It was up to anarchists to remain outside the struggle and to take no part in the matter in the hope of accelerating the destruction of monopoly finance capitalism. He says, and this is from his Tucker's State Socialism, the 1911 edition, from page 30, "Education is a slow process, and for this reason we must hope that the day of readjustment may not come too quickly. Anarchists who endeavor to hasten it by joining in the propaganda of state socialism or revolution make a sad mistake indeed. They help to so force the march of events that the people will not have time to find out, by the study of their experience, that their troubles have been due to the rejection of competition. If this lesson shall not be learned in season, the past will be repeated in the future," and it has been. Tucker became even more pessimistic at a later date. It has been, but that doesn't mean it doesn't mean that we can't get out of it. Tucker became even more pessimistic at a later date, blaming technology as well as centralization for the ills of mankind. In a letter to Clarence Lee Schwartz, July 22nd of 1930, while referring to the somber scenes de la vie future, some French stuff, de la vie future, probably translates to the view of the future, by Georges Duhamel, Tucker wrote, "The matter of my famous postscript now sinks into insignificance. The insurmountable obstacle to the realization of anarchy is no longer the power of the trusts, but the indisputable fact that our civilization is in its death throes. We may last a couple of centuries yet. On the other hand, a decade may precipitate our finish. The dark ages, sure enough. The monster mechanism is devouring mankind." Without a central clearinghouse, the individualist anarchist movement broke up into several small circles. In Detroit, Phoenix, Arizona, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, and elsewhere. Many of the Tucker associates, Byington, Labadie, Kuhn, Cohen, Schwartz, Fulton, Robinson, and allied libertarians, such as Sprading and Warren Brokaw, continued a program of written propaganda which was temporarily interrupted by the World War, only to commence again immediately after and gradually decline into the obscurity of the Depression of 1929 through 1939. Tucker abandoned his anti-war stand in 1915 to support the Allies and particularly France. What a fool. His several visits there have endeared him to the land and its people, of which he was now a part. The post-war delusionment destroyed his enthusiasm over wartime objectives. In a letter to the New Bedford Standard on September 15th of 1922, he declared that, quote, "Those who fought intelligently in the World War fought not to make the world safe for democracy, but to make the world safe from democracy and from every other political or social tyranny. That victory is not yet won and may never be," end quote. All right, so he turned it around. Maybe partially. But maybe if less people were in support of the war at the time, maybe, I don't know. Beyond a measure of support for Sacco and Vanzetti, Tucker's interest in radicalism in the United States was now fairly well dissipated. But as he approached and then passed his 80th birth date, Tucker still retained his skill in making the pithy remark and the piercing observation. Writing to Ewing C. Baskett from his Monaco villa, he mentioned that his health was failing and countering, quote, "But I may live a long time yet," end quote. He grieved the sudden death of his old friend of nearly half a century, John Henry Mackay, whose sudden demise in Berlin on May 16th of 1933 went unnoticed otherwise. In remarking on a bit of new post office bureaucracy which annoyed him, he observed, "The state always goes from good to bad and from bad to worse. Selling Baschetti a copy of William B. Greene's Fragments resulted in a tribute. I owe him my appreciation of the giant Perdone." On the world scene in the mid-1930s, Tucker's views were unequivocal. He said, "Capitalism is at least tolerable, which cannot be said of socialism or communism," end quote. He declared, going on to observe that, quote, "Under any of these regimes, a sufficiently shrewd man can feather his nest," end quote. On another occasion, he conceded, "Yes, I think the world is hell-bent. War is certainly to come, but how soon I do not know." I hate the age in which I live, but do not hate myself for living in it. He remarked still later, but there is fun in fighting. It is not necessary to hope in order to persevere. Of the anarchist papers, he thought the one known as Mother Earth the best. He says it has unique and interesting things and commands the respect of intelligent and honest people. But he was sure that its influence was very limited. On the subject of anarchism, he was unrelenting. He conceded that there were anarchists, quote, in all countries, end quote, but would not venture a guess as to their total number. But he scouted Baschetti's question about anarchist communism. He says, the term communist anarchist has no sense. What I call the anarchist movement, he goes on to say, what I call the anarchist movement is near the vanishing point, he concluded, and added some very critical words on the situation in Spain, already on the verge of its great upheaval of 1936 through 1939. Anarchism in Spain is a misnomer, he said. Tucker chided Baschetti for asking the question. In Proudhon's day, his influence in Spain was considerable, and his adherents were intelligent. Spanish anarchism of today, with perhaps a few exceptions of little significance, those Spanish anarchists are a crazy bunch. Benjamin R. Tucker died at his home in Monaco on June 22nd of 1939 in his 86th year, survived by his wife and daughter. His burial, following a civil private service, quote, without mourning, according to his express wish, took place 2 days later. The cataclysm of the Second World War was barely more than 2 months away, and in the following decade and a half, interest in and knowledge of the tradition which Tucker represented faded to an all-time low. It was a rare person whose personal acquaintance went back to Tucker's time who managed to live into the mid-1950s and witnessed the revival of interest in the literature and ideas of American individualist anarchism. A study of anarchism, especially since the end of liberty and the almost simultaneous rise of Emma Goldman and Mother Earth, the new voice of anarchist communism, is probably best conceived as belonging in a study of the whole radical movement of the 20th century. Today, an anarchist press exists in the United States, Canada, Mexico, Argentina, Australia, China, Japan, and India, as well as in every country in Western Europe. Its growth as an underground movement in Germany, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, and Russia is a well-known fact. It is naive to believe that the two great wars of our century have succeeded in extinguishing the belief in a stateless system. An unmeasurable influence of anarchism is the presence of much of its libertarian flavor in numerous organizations around the world, which have not openly expressed opposition to the state as such, although forced into assuming a degree of caution which it previously rarely needed. Anarchism and its close industrial relation, syndicalism, remain intellectual forces of considerable strength and capable of surprising vigor in situations characterized by political vacuum, as the activity of Barcelona and Catalonia demonstrated so dramatically during the recent Spanish Civil War. The catastrophe of war has been a strong impetus in arousing interest in the arguments of anarchism, especially in defeating countries and in areas of great destruction. This interest has extended from the calculated individual escapism of the Henry David Thoreau type to the scientific communal village preached for well over a generation by Peter Kropotkin a moribund or deadly or dead philosophy is not capable of producing the astonishing volume of literature that has poured from the world anarchist press since 1920. 20th century political tendencies have been expressed predominantly in collectivism of one variety or another, especially in their practical aspects. Current trends continue decidedly in this direction, despite widespread apprehension concerning the consequences of the submergence of the individual personality. On the other hand, the repeated failure of national states to solve either internal or external problems to any large measure of satisfaction has been accompanied by a chorus of anarchist criticism, expressing belief that human society will never be orderly so long as the state is the institution through which man seeks to develop his abilities and capacities for social living. Facts. Bars. In the United States and Western Europe, anarchist thought appears under three other forms. One, as an intellectual distillate found principally among the avant-garde of literature, philosophy, and art. Two, as an expression of the syndicalist movement, which continues to support a vigorous English and foreign language press. Three, as a reflection of many small libertarian groups ranging from experimental educators to exponents of social decentralization. Their numbers include a sizable body of intellectuals grown tired of politics and frightened of the potentialities of the state as a machine of destruction in an age of automatic weapons and highly specialized scientific war materiel. Many of these are pacifists already shocked by the conduct of total war. Still, another anti-statist reflection can be detected among a sensitive minority without positive stands of any particular kind, but anxiously seeking to escape the elements of the state in our time as expressed by industrialization, urbanization, and cultural typing. Past mid-century, the world tends toward the authoritarianism of Marxian politics and away from the individualistic and mutualistic concepts of society embodied in the ideas taught by Warren, Tucker, Bakunin, and Kropotkin. Nevertheless, the anarchists remain unimpressed by the world which authority is engaging in forging. It sounded like I was saying foraging. Nevertheless, the anarchists remain unimpressed by the world which authority is engaged in forging, in which the outstanding characteristic of human life appears to be its increasing insecurity. The telling effect of anarchist criticism, although largely negative, upon critics of the present world orders such as Gaetano Mosca and Robert Michaels, and many others, cannot be ignored, nor have these writers attempted to refute most of such charges. Yet, despite the piercing insights which anarchism has provided as means of observing evidences of decay and viciousness in political and economic systems of all kinds, it has itself been subject to the same deteriorating effects in attempts of a practical nature at realizing its goals. Nowhere is there evidence that the leadership principle and the struggle for power within groups of whatever origin are becoming obsolete. And if you want to read the rest, you can go to voluntaryistacademy.com and you can go to the resources page, and you can check out my website here, voluntaryistacademy.com, resources page, and you can get everything and more of what I have read during this series, what I'm going to be reading in the future, the past, the present, PDFs for your enjoyment. You can go and check all the footnotes for instance, like there's hundreds of footnotes in this book. You know, hundreds of references, hundreds and hundreds that I did not read, or else we would have been doing this for like another year. But yeah, Men Against the State by James J. Martin, published in 1952 or 1953. What does it say? 1957. Maybe this is a different edition. Anyways, wait, what did it say? First published in 1953. Well, it's been real. What's the chat saying? I got Rip in the chat. He's carrying the weight of the chat. His back must hurt. Somebody give this guy a Tylenol or whatever for his back pain for carrying the chat. Anyways, yeah, you can go over to my website, check it out. Here's the homepage. You can catch up on some of the old. I have to catch up. I interviewed Jason quite a long time ago, but I have to catch up on publishing here. You can become a sponsor, and that looks a little bit like this. $3 a month for the first 30 people. 28 spots left there for that. You can become a sponsor for $5 a month, and VIP sponsorship is $50 a month. I've had a very interesting life. I've overcome a lot of challenges, and I am not a licensed professional, but I have unmatched care and honesty, as I've said here. Unmatched honesty and care, where I can help you with maybe some substance abuse issues you might be experiencing or going through. And I wish to offer that service, but I'm only taking in 10 people. Okay. So that's that. But when you become a member, when you become a sponsor of the show, you get to come into the Discord community. You get to support me on a monthly basis. We're going to be doing live call-ins to the show when the time is right, and a bi-weekly town hall where we get to meet up on like a digital chat in the Discord once every 2 weeks to just hang out for a couple hours and discuss what we're doing to peacefully bring the ideas discussed on this channel into action. Because yes, philosophy involves action. And voluntarism is all about action. So these are the things I'm hoping to try to create. I need your help to do that. I want to create a vibrant community of like-minded individuals that are interested in discussing the content on this channel, or voluntarism. Maybe there's things that aren't on this channel that have to do with voluntarism that you'd like to discuss. You can bring those ideas to the Voluntarist Academy community for $5 a month or $3 a month if you get in early. And I mean, that's a month. That's less than the price of coffee, a cup of coffee that some people pay for every single day. Oh yeah, and so say you go and try to join. I mean, you can even save a little bit more money. You can pay annually. Okay, if you wanted to be a $5 a month guy, you could pay $50 for the entire year. What a deal! And that's how that works over there. And you can sign up to the newsletter. And when you do that, you get a free you get a copy of the Voluntaryist Creed by Auburn Herbert sent to you instantly. And if you don't want to do any of those things and you just want to have a one-off donation, you can still do that at Buy Me a Coffee, where my membership portal is run through, or you can do a one-time donation through multiple cryptocurrencies or PayPal. You can check out the One Great Work Network at onegreatworknetwork.com, where I am a content creator featured on the One Great Work Network, hosted by Mark Passio of What on Earth is Happening, and along with about 70 plus other content creators in the natural law space. I'm a little hazy on the correct number at the moment. I'm pretty sure it's over 70 content creators in the natural law category of content. Trying to, just as the banner says, we're trying to end slavery one mind at a time. If you are feeling behind in life and you want to get a little bit of a heads up, you want to get a little bit, you want to get a little caught up, you want to kind of, blaze your own path and go forward with a little bit better understanding of who you are, what skills you have, and how to bring them to the market and be a little more autonomous in your life and not maybe have the scarcity mindset that a paycheck provides and have a mindset of abundance. You want to fill in the blanks of what the public school system left out. You want to take your own life into your own hands and begin to write your own script in life. This is our birthright, for Christ's sake. You can go over to Get Autonomy. It's a 12-week course hosted by Richard Grove of tragedyandhope.com or Grand Theft World or Peace Revolution, depending on how you may know him. He's a wonderful mentor and a really great friend. So thank you, Richard, for all you've done. And I want other people to be able to get in on this autonomy program and be able to experience the 12-week course so they can break out of their shell and break into their autonomous living. And I think that might do it for tonight. So with that being said, I'm James Cordiner. Thank you for tuning in. Next week, I may be back, like I said, with The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. And this will begin our next maybe 3-part series, depending on how things go with this one. And look out for random it's not going to be live streams. It's just going to be random publications of the Anti-Federalist papers. Because I don't know, I think it's fun. I think it might be fun to go through, some of this old stuff that maybe not a lot of people really pay attention to these days, and kind of get a feel for how people like Patrick Henry and Robert Yates and Samuel Byron, among many others, who had to write these letters anonymously in fear that even their own countrymen would come after them because of their stance against the ratification of a constitution. Many of their arguments in the Anti-Federalist papers actually directly led to the formation of the Constitution that was eventually ratified in 1792. And so it's interesting history, and I think we should know it to see what they were arguing against. And yeah, so number 1 is available now on the channel. I don't know if I'll read all of them, but there's like 85 of them. So there's a lot of material that could be kind of gone through there. And since, a lot of them are kind of short, it gives me an opportunity to kind of spread my wings and fly a little bit with some video editing. And so go check out the Anti-Federalist Papers number 1. And that's on the channel right now. And I just want to say thank you for everybody thank you to everybody that has joined me on this journey through Men Against the State. We'll have to do a debrief. I'll have to write up something for a debrief at some point. But it really gives us a little bit of perspective with some of the people that were speaking out against the state in our history in America. And And not all of them were always correct. Not all of them were always right in their stance. But this is the important thing to remember, is that they're pressing against the state. They're coming up to that boundary, and they're pushing the envelope, and they're antagonizing the authorities in order to remind the authorities who the authorities are supposed to be subservient to, who the real authority is supposed to be, which is the individual. It's like Rothbard said, and I wouldn't want to get it wrong, but in For a New Liberty, the Libertarian Manifesto, Rothbard says, and I didn't have this teed up. Where is it? There it is. He says, the nature of man is such that each individual person must, in order to act, choose his own ends and employ his own means in order to attain them. Possessing no automatic instincts, each man must learn about himself and the world, use his mind to select values, learn about cause and effect, and act purposefully to maintain himself and advance his life. Since men can think, feel, evaluate, and act only as individuals, it becomes vitally necessary for each man's survival and prosperity, that he be free to learn, choose, develop his own faculties, and act upon his knowledge and values. This is the necessary path of human nature. To interfere with and cripple this process by using violence goes profoundly against what is necessary by man's nature for his life and prosperity. Violent interference with a man's learning and choices is therefore profoundly anti-human. It violates the natural law of man's needs. And that's what we do. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to preserve that idea. And we're trying to preserve that way of life, of individualism. Voluntarism is congruent with that, with natural law, and it recognizes the principles laid out in the studies of natural law. So, yeah, that's what we're trying to do here, is to just antagonize and to stress test the state, okay? To stress test the authorities just a little bit and remind them, who's really in charge here. So press forward with that mentality. We covered some heavy topics, and especially in this edition. And I just wanted to emphasize that for a moment, that in no way, shape, or form do I personally, individually advocate for any political violence. And I know that anarchism can be wrapped up in that messaging by some people out there that don't really understand anarchism. I want them to give channels like mine a chance. I want them to give themselves a chance to learn more about this philosophy. I want them to learn more about the violence of the state and how government is always violent. There is no such thing as peaceful government. Even with what the founders of this country were trying to lay out, you can't have government and freedom at the same time. You just can't. It's like saying 2 + 2 = 5. Those two whole numbers do not equal 5 when you add them together. They just don't. And 2.9 plus 2.9 equal 4.8. They can, or no, wait, I'm sorry. 5.8. So I don't even know how to do math right now. It's too late at night. I don't know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying, though. You get the idea. You get the gist. I'm going to take my foot out from my mouth and let you guys go. VoluntaryistAcademy.com. Thank you for tuning in. On your way out, I want you to remember, taxation isn't just theft. Taxation is slavery. Try to not pay it and see what happens to you when you get caught. Well, bless you for not paying it anyways, but we all know what happens to those who get caught. And last but not least, you own yourself, period. No one owns you. You're not really a slave. You're not a prisoner here. We might be prisoners here, but that doesn't make you a slave. And yeah, I mean, we're pretty down and out right now, but we can get back up and continue fighting. It just takes a little bit of courage and moral consistency. understanding that right and wrong exist objectively, and that we all have the same rights and the same wrongs. So I love you all. Thank you for tuning in. And again, see you next time.